It's crunch time for the New York Giants as they get back to work on Monday to get ready for the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about the impact of Sunday's game. We'll also touch upon the latest with Odell Beckham Jr. and a couple of thoughts on Saquon Barkley. All that coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 10 times the amount of your money on any entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name's Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us to start the week. It is Monday, November 28th. Normally, we would do a game review, but we've already done that, the Giants having played on Thursday. So instead, on today's show, we are going to take a look at crunch time. We're going to kick things off with the crunch time, look at the impact of the games played on week 12 and what effect that has on the Giants and their playoff hopes. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the latest regarding Odell Beckham Jr., because there was some news to break over the weekend. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about Saquon Barkley and a theory that I have about his usage by the Giants. So all that on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Happy to have you with us. All right, Giant fans. So let's get into the main thing here, and that is where things stand for the New York Giants as of the end of week 12. Now, as I record this, obviously, the Eagles have not played, but that should have no bearing really on what's going to happen with the Giants. But the current playoff situation, or the current playoff picture, if you will, is the Giants, who are at 7-4 in third place in the NFC East. They have suddenly a big game against Washington coming up, and actually 2 big games. Washington having the Giants in week 13, and then again in week 15. I think they have a bye week in between. So 2 very important games for the New York Giants. And the reason for that is obvious. The Commanders are breathing down the Giants' neck right now. The Commanders beat the Falcons on Sunday, a score of 19-13. They have won 6 of their last 7 games. Their one loss coming in week 9 against Minnesota. Washington has gotten hot, ladies and gentlemen. So they are now at 6-5 in overall. And in the division, they're currently 1-2. So why is this weekend's game against the Giants a big one? Well, number one, it's a division game. So just as was the case for the Giants with the Dallas Cowboys, you have the first tiebreaker being the head-to-head. Should the 2 teams have the same record at the end of the year? That's what the Giants are facing right now with Washington. All right, so Dallas has the head-to-head tiebreaker, having swept the Giants. Washington at 7-5. If they beat the New York Giants on Sunday at MetLife Stadium, guess what? The Giants and Washington will have, Washington will improve to 8-5. The Giants will fall to 7-5. Guess who is going to be in last place in the division? Yeah, you guessed it, folks. Going to be the Giants. Now, again, Washington has a bye week after they face the Giants this coming weekend, and then they're right back to hosting the Giants the following weekend. So it's kind of a weird scheduling, but this is a big game for the Giants. Any cushion, any leeway the Giants once had, basically it's gone. If they want to make the playoffs, they've got to sweep Washington. All right. They can't afford to split. They have got to sweep Washington and just, hope that Washington somewhere along the line also stumbles. But right now, like I said, Washington's been hot and they're getting some players back. I think Chase Young will be back in the lineup next week. Really a big, big test for the Giants. Now, one thing I do want to mention for what it's worth, the Washington defense, the run defense, has been stout ever since allowing 237 net yards rushing against the Chicago Bears back on October 13th. The Commanders allowed Minnesota just 56 yards on the ground, Philadelphia only 94 yards, Houston only 21 yards, and the Falcons, whom the Commanders played this past weekend, they got 167 yards. So a little bit, a little bit of a break there. But the point being is that Washington's run defense has been pretty stout. And right now, I think we all know that the Giants, their bread and butter has been the running game. And if the Giants cannot get that running game going, and I have to tell you that they have had trouble getting that running game going the last couple of weeks. If they can't get that running game going against the Commanders, it's going to be a long, long afternoon, folks. So I've got concerns about that. It's still early in the week, obviously, but, the Giants have got to figure this out. And I don't know what kind of self-scouting they might have done. I know that the players had off Friday when they got back from Dallas. I don't know what the coaches did. I think the coaches worked part of the day. Hopefully they have figured out how to get that running game uncorked, because if that running game isn't working, the Giants ain't working and it's going to fall apart. So this game coming up against Washington is big, big, big. The Giants, if they fall into fourth place in the division, I suspect, and I haven't done the math, but I think it would mean the Giants would basically either be on the cusp for a postseason berth, or they would actually be on the bubble. So they would actually fall out of the seeding. There's 7 seeds. Giants would fall out of the seeding. So I am concerned about this game coming up. It is a big game. The Giants cannot afford to drop this one against Washington, who has been red hot of late. And, speaking of matchups, the Washington offense, can we talk about their rushing offense? Which, let's see, the rushing offense, they've had the last 3 games, actually going back to the Minnesota game, 137 yards, 152 yards, 153 yards against Houston. And against the Falcons, they had 176 yards. Not good news for a Giants run defense, which has kind of struggled a little bit. So, folks, this matchup is not an easy one. If you were like me and you marked this game down as a surefire win for the Giants, I think, looking at the Giants schedule, looking at the opponents and who's getting hot at the right times, who's not, there's no such thing as a gimme game. And this certainly isn't a gimme game. So if the Giants want to keep their playoff hopes alive, they have got to win this game against Washington. Ideally, they sweep Washington, but at least get a split if they can in order to stay ahead of the Commanders. So we'll see how the Giants do with that. On Monday, we're going to actually get, an idea of where things are. The players will be back. The Giant players will be back from a long weekend. Tuesday, they practice. They're practicing Wednesday. Thursday, they're off. And then they practice on Friday. So we'll get an idea of some of these guys who have been banged up are able to return and contribute to the Giants getting across the finish line and into the postseason. All right, coming up next, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about Odell Beckham Jr. and the latest. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find Block Forever available as a bonus episode on the Locked On NFL podcast right now. Block Forever is a new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil, who takes the conversation about football to the next level. Khalil sits down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get real about what happens on the field and behind the scenes, both in the locker room, during team meetings, and back at the hotel. New episodes of Block Forever will be recorded and released ahead of every Thursday night football game. So head on over to Locked On NFL for a sneak peek of Block Forever, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere now for free. Audible. Get in the game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, your host. And we are just looking at various topics. We talked about crunch time for the Giants in the first segment. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the latest with Odell Beckham. And then we'll wrap things up in the last segment. I have some thoughts about Saquon Barkley that I want to share with you. But first, let me just give you the schedule, rough idea on the schedule here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. We're going to do Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. So if you get your questions into me by 7:00 on Monday night, I should be able to get them into the show. If you're going to send them via Twitter, please tag them Ask P Train. Wednesday, I'm hoping to have a player interview with you. I'm trying to get it scheduled. So we will see if I can get that scheduled and get that online for you. I'm still waiting to find out if it's going to happen or not. On Thursday, of course, is crossover Thursday. I believe David Harrison will be joining me, and we will be talking about the Giants-Washington matchup. Friday is Locked On Giants Live. That's what we've got planned. So Locked On Giants Live, Traina, Tana, and Dog. So hope you will keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, in this segment, I want to talk about Odell Beckham Jr. Now, a couple weeks ago, I devoted a whole show to Odell and if the Giants should sign him or why they shouldn't sign him and what I think happens. I still don't think the Giants are going to sign him. Now, I bring up Odell in this segment for the simple reason that there was an incident reported where he was removed from an aircraft on a flight that originated in Miami, was headed to Los Angeles. And as you can expect, folks, there's varying accounts as to what happened. Beckham's lawyer is saying one thing, the airline and the police report were saying another thing. I'm not here to sit here and judge whose report is accurate. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to do that. But here's what I will say about Odell. The Giants are due to have him in the building starting Thursday. It's supposed to be a 2-day visit, which generally is a good sign. And I'll tell you why it's a good sign, because usually the way these visits go is they have them come in and, sometimes what they'll do for a guy that's coming off of an injury is they'll work him out, then they'll take him to dinner, and then they'll see how he checks out with his physical the next day, if everything worked out okay. So there's definitely interest in there. But here's the problem, folks. Regardless of how this incident on the airplane came about, that's a distraction. And if you're Joe Shane, if you're Brian Dable, I've said before, this team is not one player away from making a Super Bowl run. This team has a salary cap crunch to where I'm not so sure they're going to be able to pay Beckham what SpotTrack projects as his market rate. It's like $13 million a year. All right. I don't see that happening unless the Giants touch Kenny Galladay's contract, which I'm pretty sure they don't want to have to do until, and if they do have to do it, they don't want to do it until the very last possible minute to minimize the impact. But the distraction, that's the biggest concern I think everybody would be asking about. What exactly happened? Quite frankly, folks, look, I don't want to sound critical here, and I know I'm going to sound critical, but this whole free agent thing, this whole tour, all right, I get it. That's what guys do. They do that to drum up interest. They do that to pit teams against one another in the bidding process. Just at this point, pick a team already and sign with them. And here's the other thing: there are reports that Beckham is healthy. Now, are those reports coming from his side, or are they actually results of physicals that he's taken with the teams that he's contemplating? I think it might be coming maybe from his doctors. So I don't think any team's going to sign him without working him out first and having their doctors put their eyes on him. This whole tour, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the LeBron James tour, which, LeBron James is a fan, what can you say? He's the GOAT. But to me, when you've got to drum up that kind of interest, that's just, I don't know, that just doesn't sit well with me. It's like, make your visits, do your due diligence, pick a team, sign with them, and get going. Enough of the fanfare and all that stuff. And this is coming out, obviously in media reports, but these reports are obviously originating. They've got to be originating, I would think, at some point with people who know what Odell is planning to do. So do you really want a guy who's going to, do everything so grandiose and potentially be a distraction? Does that fit in this culture that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are trying to build? I don't know. Now, there's no question that the talent can help this team, because as I'm going to talk about in the next segment, Saquon can't do it all alone. But I think if you're Joe Schoen, you stay the course. You build through the draft. You supplement where you can in free agency. I don't know that I would supplement the receiver group at this point in free agency. I don't think I would go with Odell. Maybe I could see them trying to reach out to Cole Beasley, a guy that Brian Daboll is familiar with. But quite honestly, if you're going to bring in somebody, you got to get somebody who's not going to want a ton of money and who's not going to be a lightning rod for attention. And I think that's really the biggest challenge for the Giants. Odell just seems to be a lightning rod for attention, whether he wants it or not. And I just don't see that fitting into the culture that this team is trying to build. So, and here's the other thing, folks. By the time, all right, let's look at the timing here for, if we could. Let's say, all right, we're in week 12. We just finished week 12. Beckham is reportedly coming to visit the Giants on Thursday and Friday, which means there would be no way he would be ready to go by this weekend's game. Even if he signed, I just don't see him being ready to go, right? Which means, okay, if he's going to continue his tour and say, okay, Giants, I want to see what Dallas and Buffalo have to offer. Now you're going into week 14. And maybe by the middle part of week 14 or towards the end of week 14, maybe then a decision's made. I just got through saying in the first segment that this game coming up against Washington is huge. So if you want all hands on deck and you want guys that can help you, and again, Odell's a guy who can help the Giants if they can make it work. Wouldn't you want to have him available for the week 13 game against Washington? Does it really pay at that point to say, okay, now you're bringing him in against Philadelphia. Philadelphia's going to run away with the division, it looks like. And then you got Washington, the rematch, which if the Giants lose the first one, now, you talk about a must win, that becomes a must win. I mean, they're all must wins at this point, but that in particular takes on a bigger sense of urgency. So I just feel like the timing of this whole tour is just, it just threw things off. I think that's why if, you have a team like the Cowboys who's got a little bit better roster than the Giants, a little bit more complete roster, makes sense for Odell to go there. All right. The Giants are not one player away. And I would be absolutely stunned if Beckham signs with the Giants. I think, the Giants are doing their due diligence as they should, but I just don't see it happening for more reasons than one. The culture, the timing, the money, there's just too many things against this that I think just won't work. So, we'll see. Obviously, you never say never. Obviously, Beckham has mutual interest if he's coming to see the Giants. He could have easily said, no, I'm not going to come in, but that is not the case. So we'll see how it all plays out. But folks, I just don't see it happening. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I don't see a reunion between Beckham and the Giants happening, even though I think all of us would like to see it happen for sentimental reasons. Giants got to me, move on. build up the right way through the draft and use free agency to supplement here and there. This is a free agent signing, obviously, but you can't spend big bucks on him. So unless Beckham's willing to come in and forego a signing bonus, which I don't see happening, I'd be stunned if it happened. I don't see how the money's going to work for Beckham and the Giants. I just don't see it, but we will see. All right, coming up next, I want to talk a little bit about Saquon because I have a few thoughts there. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, Giant fans, today's episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Playing daily fantasy based on player projections has never been easier when you visit prizepicks.com. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go on to score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you win up to 10 times the amount on your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks is currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada, and they offer projections on every sport. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and Prize Picks offers safe and fast withdrawals. Download the Prize Picks app today or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. Don't forget to enter that promo code at sign up, LOCKEDON, at prizepicks.com. Giant fans, thanks for making the LockedOn Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, your host. And in this segment of the podcast, I want to talk about Saquon Barkley, the offense, the face of the franchise. And, a big question mark is that a lot of people have had about Saquon Barkley is what's happened to him. The running game hasn't looked as potent as it has, earlier in the season. Saquon, according to, a lot of people, and also, it looks like it, at any rate on film, just doesn't look like he's running with the power and the oomph that he had earlier in the year. So a lot of people are like, what's wrong with the running game? What's wrong with Saquon? I don't think that there's anything wrong specifically with Saquon. Yes, I know he had the shoulder injury, but he has played through it. You want to look at what's wrong with Barkley in the running game. I question the workload. All right. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, well, he's your best player. You got to get the ball in his hands. You got to, run him. You've got to get him out in space. You got to throw the ball to him. And you'd be right. But see, here's what this whole scenario kind of reminds me of. I go back to when the Giants, a few years ago, when they had Odell on the team, and Odell was the offense. The Giants basically didn't have, much of a running game that gave anybody, fits to scheme against. They didn't really have, a solid number 2 receiver. It was like Odell was the guy. That was the guy that defensive coordinators had to scheme against, the guy that they had to stop. And the Giants became one-dimensional because once teams figured out how to slow down that passing game with Odell, guess what? The offense couldn't function. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with the Giants offense of 2022. Teams have figured out how to stop Saquon Barkley or how to slow him down. You throw in the injuries on the offensive line, the absence of tight end Daniel Bellinger, the fact that the Giants haven't been able to do those jumbo packages like we saw a couple of weeks ago that worked so well. The Giants just, they don't have any answers. And the answer is to add somebody or to have somebody step up and start to create issues, if you will, for the opposing defensive coordinators. They don't have that right now. Teams know that. They know, look, we stopped Saquon, we stopped the Giants. So that's what I think the problem is. Now, here's the other thing. The pounding that Barkley is taking. It almost reminds me of, the Giants are constantly running Barkley, which again, I get why they're doing it. But if you can't have somebody co-shoulder the load to help take some of the stress off of him, maybe you have Matt Breida do it, or maybe Gary Brightwell, maybe, which we started to see. You're going to run Barkley down to the nub. You're going to have this guy have so much tread on his tires that if this team does get into the playoffs, it's going to be fair to wonder, is there going to be anything left in his tank? This is the danger when one player becomes the face of your offense. We saw it again. We saw it with Odell years ago. We're seeing it now. So I think the Giants, and again, you can say that an NFL running back is built to withstand that. The Derrick Henrys of the world, they can carry the ball, 200, 300 times and not have any issues. I get that. But I just, there has to be a balance. And, the Giants, they just don't have that balance on offense where they have a guy amongst the receiving corps. I mean, the closest they have now is Darius Slayton, who's kind of, stepped up. But even Darius Slayton, as good as he's been, I don't think he's exactly created headaches for opposing defensive coordinators. So they've got to find some kind of a balance and say, okay, you know what? Saquon gets shut down. We're going to beat you with a pass. And they just haven't been able to do that. So that's the danger, or the pitfall, if you will, that the Giants have fallen into. And here's what else is going to be interesting. Barkley, as everybody knows, is going to be a free agent after this season. He's going to get re-signed. I really believe he's going to get re-signed. But you got to give this guy some help. You can't just go and make him the highest paid running back and not give him some help. And I do think that Joe Schoen will get him some help. They'll take care of the receiver spot. They'll finish the rebuild of the offensive line. I do think the Giants will address all those needs. But, I would be really, really reluctant to back up the Brinks truck on Barkley. As valuable as he has been, you see, again, the downward trend. And it's not all his fault. You got to look at the blocking and all that stuff and what other teams are doing. But, they've got to find a way. They have got to find a way, whether he's something he's not doing. And Barkley has owned up to that. He said, I've got to look at how I can be better. So I just feel like the Giants, they've fallen into that trap where one guy has become their offense, and that's it. And once that one guy gets shut down, that's it, guys. That's all she wrote. So that's what I think is wrong with Barkley. I don't think it's anything physical. It's just a matter of how the team is constructed. Get some additional playmakers on this team and then see what it looks like. And until they do that, I just don't know if the Giants have enough to cross the finish line into the postseason. I'm hoping they do. I would love nothing better than to cover a postseason game, but I have questions as to whether or not they're going to be able to do it. So make a believer out of me, Giants, please. I'll happily admit that I'm wrong. I'm still staying with my 8-9 prediction. Could they possibly get 10 wins out of this? Yeah, with a break here and there, but got to see it. Got to see it. And right now, the Giants, they've been fighting, they've been scratching and clawing, but just not enough oomph like we saw at the beginning of the year. And a big part of that is because of the injuries and the change up in chemistry and all that stuff that has affected this team. So we will see what bag of tricks, what head coach Brian Daboll has in his bag of tricks to get this team back on track. Heartbreaking loss to the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, but things are still right in front of the Giants. And if they could just pull everything together and get back on track and figure out how to scheme Barkley open and, defeat some of the stuff that the Cowboys did and the Lions before them did it to the run game, we could possibly see the return of Barkley that we saw earlier in the year. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. Get your questions into me by 7:00 on Monday, and I'll go through the list and I'll answer as many that come in. Until then, everybody, you have a fantastic day.